The figure on your screen now will probably be familiar to most people watching this video. It's the Welsh retired paediatrician Dr. Dewi Evans. Dr. Evans was a central figure in the trial and conviction of Lucy Letby as he appeared as the primary prosecution witness. I haven't deliberately picked an image of him with his eyes closed. This was just readily available online. Dr. Evans has since come under considerable scrutiny and criticism for his conduct and behaviour, not to mention due to the scientific evidence and medical diagnoses that he put forth in the court case. I wrote to Dr. Evans some months ago now requesting an interview, which was not something I wanted to do because he is not someone that I hold in particularly high esteem. However, given that I've written a book in which I am significantly critical of him, it was incumbent on me to approach him and offer him the chance to answer some questions. I didn't expect him to respond to this correspondence because there is no conceivable way that he could have answered these questions. And indeed, at this point in time, he stopped even attempting to justify his own views and justify what he said publicly previously, as evidenced by the fact that when he spoke to The Guardian recently, he just made a very weak and really rather pathetic generic statement that I've addressed extensively in a recent video. So what I'm going to do in this video is go over 25 questions that I would have addressed to Dr. Evans had he been receptive and had he been responsive. I would suggest that he will never be properly responsive to an interview ever again now, because he probably understands the kind of trouble that he's in. And although previously, I think he just thought he could go to like BBC Radio Wales or whoever it was, speak to a weak journalist who doesn't really understand the case, spin them a bit of a yarn, and they just accept it and they put it in the media. And he didn't seem to understand that people will very forensically examine what he's saying, and things remain on the internet forever. And he's been contradicting himself right, left, and centre for years, giving all these interviews. I mean, he's given more ammunition to the defence on his own than almost any other factor in the case. I'd say easily, because his diagnoses are dreadful to begin with, and then instead of just accepting criticism and saying, well, when the first criticism came, he could have come out and said, right, well, I stand by my reports. Obviously, other people are entitled to their opinion. This is a legal matter. I won't make any further comment. He can't even do that now. After 2 years of digging himself deeper and deeper and deeper into a hole, where he's created this whole fabric around his answers that is just absolute nonsense. And as I say, he's contradicted himself so many times by now. There is no way that he could have answered these questions, as you'll begin to see when I go into the video. But even now, even in that situation, he still has to have his say of, I'm a highly regarded paediatrician. I've been working since 1971. The Court of Appeal said that my evidence was great, and all this kind of stuff. And even in those two paragraphs, I mean, I made a video that was nearly 1 hour 15 minutes long just from those two paragraphs. That's how much hot water he's in at this point, and that's how impossible it is for him to make any statements of any substance at this point. And if there was a retrial, for example, he's going to get absolutely slaughtered, because he was slaughtered in the original trial. It's just that it was a very unfair process and a deeply unsatisfactory court case. His cross-examination was not successful, as we will see in the weeks and months to come, as I start to work on the court transcripts. So in this video, I'm just going to look at 25 questions that I would have directed at Dr. Evans had he been willing to participate in this process. This will be the first of many parts in this series because I have way more than 25 questions to ask him. So the very first question that I would have asked Dr. Evans is this question number 1. Could you provide me with a list of the infants in the court case and the mechanism used to cause collapse and or death? So I would simply have asked him to go through all of the infants from child A to child Q and explain what was the mechanism used that caused collapse or death in his opinion. Now, under usual circumstances, this would be a very strange question to ask a witness in a court case of this nature because it should have come out in court. What we do know is that the Court of Appeal listed all of the mechanisms of death or collapse in its verdict. This is significant because Dr. Evans has made every effort possible to glaze the Court of Appeal and emphasise the credibility of the Court of Appeal verdict since that it came out. So, for example, here he's stating that the Court of Appeal judges were supportive of my evidence. They supported the verdict unreservedly. I am not in receipt of any information that indicates that the appeal court judges were mistaken. And then, then even recently, he again specifically mentioned the Court of Appeal here to The Guardian, stating that his opinions were considered by the Court of Appeal. So he's very much trying to emphasise that he is aware of the Court of Appeal judgment, that the Court of Appeal judgment essentially overrides everything else. However, inconveniently for Dr. Evans, the letter that he wrote to Channel 5 in which he disowned numerous diagnoses from the court case has now been circulated. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if he simply does not know that this letter is all over the internet and in the public domain. So I would have addressed these questions to him and asked him to give these list of mechanisms and collapses. And I think he doesn't even know that people know that he's written to Channel 5 disowning what he actually said in the court case and what Dr. Manarides has said in the court case as well. So there are two possibilities here. Either this is just a desperate attempt. Well, nothing is favourable. This is either lying. It's a desperate attempt to get this TV programme taken off the air so that he doesn't look bad, which he obviously did. Or, he's changing his opinion again. It's very difficult to say that his medical opinion is legitimate at this stage, but it's probable that this was just an attempt to get this taken off the air and to try to convince them that they've made terrible mistakes. I don't know, but I don't think he even knows this letter is out there. But the reason to ask him to do a big list of all the infants and the mechanisms is that he has to either disagree with this or he has to disagree with this. He can't be consistent with both of them because they operate in an independent parallel universe from one another. In one parallel universe, the Court of Appeal is saying this happened, and in another parallel universe, he is saying this happened, and those two things cannot coexist. So after I sent the questions and after he'd answered the mechanism, then I would move on to ask him about changing his opinion or the Channel 5 letter, depending on what he said. It's really hard to say what he would actually say at this point for the mechanism of collapse and death, because he's changed his mind so many times, including during the court case, after the court case, in his reports, in public statements, that he's denied changing his mind. I mean, it's absolutely farcical. It's truly embarrassing. And he's denied changing his mind despite the fact that on the screen now was a statement he made some months ago. It's not even that this was a recent statement. He made this statement some months ago to The Guardian. So it's not as if that this isn't known to be the case. It's fully established in his own words. There's no wonder that Cheshire Police want to sit on the reports and don't want to release the reports to the defence, because Dr. Evans will look idiotic, the prosecution will look idiotic, the police will look idiotic, and there's a very real threat of the case collapsing immediately. So in what is, I think, a fairly pathetic and gutless response, Cheshire Police have refused to release the reports, probably because they know that it completely contradicts what's in the Court of Appeal document. So once I'd engaged him, and if the primary prosecution witness can't answer the basic question of what was the mechanism of collapse or death, I mean, he surely would have had to answer that question. I don't know if he realises the extent to which he is completely screwed because of the Channel 5 letter being circulated, but it's really hard to predict whether he is so conceited and arrogant that he would have just answered the questions and given all the mechanism and collapses, believing that he could somehow explain his way out of it, or whether he would think, hold on a second, I've said different things to different people, or even if his memory's failing him. It's really hard to say whether there is some I mentioned in the previous video that I don't think someone of his age should be the central person in a case of this magnitude, and I'll stand by that opinion. In a future video, I might go into this a bit more, but the fact is that, as someone rightly acknowledged in the comment section, when you get into your mid to late 70s, there is some cognitive decline. That's inevitable. There is some decline in memory. That's also inevitable. That will happen to me. It'll happen to everyone watching this video. The degree of decline is not universal. It varies from person to person, of course, if you make it to that age. But it's possible that his memory has let him down. He's just literally who knows what was going on with this guy. The number of statements that he's made, the ridiculous nature of those statements, the fact that he's contradicted himself so many times, the fact that he's been willing to not only behave completely unprofessionally, but dig himself further and further into a hole, the ridiculous nature of the diagnosis that he came up with in the first place, and the fact that he always claims to be right, and therefore will make the most stupid statements that just make it worse and worse and worse for him. Who knows what's going on in his head? I think there's an enormous degree of arrogance, but also I do think there's a possibility that he's just forgotten what he said. He's done so many interviews to so many different publications, saying so many different things. It's possible he's just simply forgotten some of the things that he said. So who knows what would have happened if he'd actually responded to me and answered these questions. But one question I could have put to him would have been, if he had, let's say he just repeated the diagnosis from the Court of Appeal document, so that he doesn't know I've got the Channel 5 letter, he probably doesn't even know that's online. So then I would have said to him, why did you write to Channel 5 disowning the diagnosis made in the court case? It would have been very difficult for him to answer that question, because it's already embarrassing for him that it's even known that he's written to Channel 5 doing that. So I don't know how he would have answered that question. Alternatively, so this would be kind of a follow-up question rather. So then I could have asked him, why did you respond favourably to the Court of Appeal verdict, even very recently, when it completely contradicts several diagnoses that you've made in court? And then a follow-up question that I would ask him would be, question number 2, why did you tell The Guardian that you changed your diagnoses, and why have you written to Channel 5 indicating different diagnoses to those that appeared both in court and in the Court of Appeal document? Of course, he has claimed that he hasn't changed his diagnoses, but then he's told The Guardian that he hasn't, and he's told Channel 5 that he's done something different. But then he's praised the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal says he's gone with his original diagnoses, but that's different from Channel 5, it's different from The Guardian, but then he hasn't changed his mind. So this is the tapestry that he's woven for himself at this point. So question number 3 can be just simply, we know that you've changed your diagnoses multiple times during the court case, despite having worked on your reports of 5 years prior to this and having been through multiple iterations. Have you changed diagnoses after the court case? I'd love to have seen his answer to that. Question 4, you stated with regard to the Court of Appeal that his verdict comes out very strongly in relation to the evidence given by those of us acting as independent witnesses, having claimed to have read the entire document. Did you notice that the Court of Appeal document included a table which listed mechanisms of collapse and death for the infants, which you have since written to Channel 5 disowning? Question 5. If you didn't notice this, can we assume that you haven't, in fact, read the Court of Appeal verdict? If you did notice it, why didn't you mention when speaking to the media that the Court of Appeal had contradicted the letter that you wrote to Channel 5, as well as comments that you made to The Guardian? Question 6. More importantly, which diagnoses are accurate? Is it those that are included in the Court of Appeal, which have been ridiculed by doctors in the Guardian article of July 2024 as rubbish, ridiculous, implausible and fantastical, or is it what you have since told Channel 5, which differs enormously from what you said in court, and the Court of Appeal document, which you have since praised publicly several times? Question 7. Why did you change your opinion? Was it because you were ridiculed by more qualified currently practicing doctors, as suggested by Dr. Philip Hammond? Question 8. Considering the above, would you like to maintain your claim regarding your diagnoses, or would you like to retract the assertion that you've changed your opinion and diagnoses on several infants? So this is just the first series of questions, and yet already Dr. Evans will be tied in a series of knots of his own creation from which he could never recover. Question 9 would be on a different topic now. How do you know that Lucy Letby deliberately harmed the infants on the unit? How do you know that it wasn't one of the other nurses, another colleague, or a combination of different people? And the reason that I would ask that question is that Dr. Evans made this claim to the Daily Mail in October 2024. If they found the same person was there during lots of incidents, they'd have a suspect. So it's not even the same person needs to be there for all of the incidents. The same person just needs to be there for lots of incidents. and that makes the identification of a suspect essentially inevitable. If Lucy Letby had done less shifts, it just would have been someone else who was there for lots of incidents, and that person would have become the suspect. And Lucy Letby would just be a marginal figure in this whole story, probably looking on and thinking, "Wow, I always liked that nurse. I wonder why, she's ended up in prison for murder." And Lucy would be free, and this other nurse would all be campaigning in favour of her. So I'm actually going to revisit that topic, but I'll move on to question 10. During the court case, you commented that you were never going to get everything 100% correct due to the reliance on case notes, and yet you were still convinced and remain convinced that Lucy Letby is unequivocally guilty. Do you see any inherent contradiction in these statements? So I just want to show that this is a correct statement. So these are court transcripts, and this is Dr. Evans speaking. So I'll just read exactly what he said. An awful lot of the information that we now know is information that's come out in his trial. So therefore, I think it is unrealistic to expect anybody to form a view that is absolutely correct in each of these cases. I wish I could, but the most recent of these reports is 2019. That's 4 years ago. The first one is 6 years ago. The second one was 5 years ago. The third one is 4 years ago. We're now in March 2023. And all of these, so therefore I have a far better understanding of the clinical sequence of events in this particular case. So I've mentioned later on, despite the fact that he's revising his opinion during the trial, still, every single report came to the conclusion that Lucy Letby is undeniably guilty. What a coincidence. So here he's going, sequence of events. That is a sequence of events. As I said, I've done this report years ago, and the idea that I could get it all perfectly right from simply looking at notes is a little bit unrealistic as far as I'm concerned, especially as I was not able to talk to any of the local nurses or local staff. So just hold on. Why? Why were you not able to talk to any of the local nurses or local staff? You've been doing this for 5 years. So you're. I mean, surely the police could have arranged for you to interview people in the hospital. Would that not be feasible? Is that not allowed? I can't see any reason why it wouldn't be allowed. Clearly, it would have been feasible over the 5 years of investigation. So why? Why didn't you talk to anyone from the hospital? I had to rely on the notes completely, and you're never going to get it. I was never going to get everything 100% correct. So, frankly, just a disgraceful position where he's now saying, "Oh, well, I'm bound to make mistakes. I'm bound to have to change things. I'm bound to have to shift things around all the time. I'm just going off the case notes." As I mentioned in a previous video, the lawyers were critical. The Thirlwell lawyers are representing the families. They were critical of the panel for going off case notes. This guy's had 5 years. He could have interviewed people. He could have got people from the hospital. He could have had context. He could have looked at previous reports. In fact, the panel have done more. The panel have done a lot more context that Dr. Evans never did. This entire court case, as is acknowledged here, is based off case notes. And then the lawyers, some of them represent. In fact, one of the lawyers, Mr. Simon Driver, he was part of the prosecution. He is now. Admittedly, they didn't get him to sign off on the statement because they recognised that this was an obvious conflict of interest. But Mr. Simon Driver said, that the panel have just used case notes. This is going to be really, I don't know the precise words they used, but they essentially suggested, how could you possibly draw a sensible conclusion? Of course, that's what the entire prosecution case is based on. So essentially, he's just torpedoed the prosecution case in his own comment. Question 11. On 17th of December 2024, you released a statement in which you claimed that I cannot recall any KC advocating on behalf of a client via a press conference, especially a case of such sensitivity. I find his style most unedifying, most unprofessional. You then claimed that this was highly disrespectful to the families, but in the book written by Jonathan Coffey and Judith Moritz, they quoted you as saying that Lucy Letby bloody murdered those babies. Would you like to retract that statement or apologise for its insensitivity? So I've got the book, but I haven't created a screenshot of that particular quotation, but I certainly wouldn't allege that if it wasn't 100% true. Question 12. When identified by The Guardian in December 2024, you told journalists from the newspaper that Lucy Letby murdered baby C, get that into your head. Would you like to make any apology for the tone of these comments? So I do have this text, as you can say, responding to The Guardian's questions about baby C. Evans stood by his opinions and wrote in an email, Lucy Letby murdered baby C, get that into your head. It seems that we just have to accept that Lucy Letby conducted these awful acts because Dr. Evans says so. Question 13 touches upon a subject that we've discussed previously, which is that there was literally no genetic testing conducted on any of the infants from the Countess of Chester, so how could Dr. Evans rule out genetic causes when compiling his reports? So we've already discussed this in previous videos, but I'm going to go over it again because it's very important. So I simply asked this question of how many rare genetic causes of death or possible collapse in neonates exist. The number of rare genetic causes of death or collapse in neonates is not a fixed figure because new genes and syndromes are still being discovered. Genetic testing is expanding the known spectrum of existing disorders. Definitions of rare and collapse vary across clinical and research settings. However, we can provide a high-level breakdown to estimate the scope of rare genetic causes in neonates. Now, I'm not going to go over all of this information, but as you can see, there's metabolic diseases, cardiac channelopathies and cardiomyopathies, mitochondrial diseases, neuromuscular disorders, immunodeficiencies, congenital syndromes with multi-system failure, sudden unexpected postnatal collapse. And these all go into the thousands. Total estimate, there are over 6,000 known monogenic diseases, many of which can present in the neonatal period. And then there's many more here, and it summarises by saying there's another 500 rare genetic disorders that can cause sudden neonatal deterioration or death. But realistically, there are thousands. So it asked me if I wanted to see the top 50 most critical ones seen in neonatal intensive care units. Even those haven't been ruled out. But then on top of that, there are many rare genetic conditions that have yet to be discovered. There are currently over 7,000 known rare diseases with 80% having a genetic basis. 1 in 33 babies is born with a congenital anomaly, many of which are genetic. So in this case, it's pretty much a 50-50 chance, I think, that there would have been a baby with a congenital anomaly from genetics that was never ruled out. Studies, and more often than not, there would be more than one. Quite often there'd be more than one, but it's pretty much a 50-50 chance that there's going to be one. Studies suggest up to 30 to 50% of critically ill neonates with suspected genetic conditions still receive no definitive diagnosis. Of course, that's true in this case. So thousands are listed here, from known monogenic diseases, suspected undiscovered genetic disorders, total future discoveries possible. There are thousands. But at the very least, you would expect actual genetic disorders that exist today, that we know about today, to be ruled out. Of course, there's no genetic testing done. Nothing was ruled out at all. It goes on further to talk about genes and so forth. So final summary here is a reasonable estimate is the 1,000 to 3,000 rare genetic conditions that present in neonates with collapse or death are still undiscovered. So you can't rule those out, but there are literally thousands and thousands of possible genetic causes for death and collapse on this unit. Dr. Evans knows for a fact no genetic testing was done, and I've heard that someone did direct a question towards him regarding this topic, and then he stopped speaking with them. I can't confirm that, but this is something that I've been told. Question 14. When speaking with the Daily Mail, you told Guy Adams that if the police could identify someone who had been present for lots of incidents, they would have a suspect. I've spoken with numerous statisticians, and they have told me that this makes the identification of a suspect essentially inevitable. If Lucy Letby had not been on shift, someone else would have been on shift more often than her, and they would instead have been identified as the suspect. Would you like to comment on this, and also your suitability for making such statistics-based recommendations to the police? So here we have the shift chart that demonstrates, oh look, Lucy Letby was always on shift. Now simply, if she had done less shifts, someone else would have had to do more shifts, and if it's possible that they could have been dispersed entirely evenly between everyone on the unit. But it's statistically likely, very likely, that someone is going to do more shifts than everyone else. And therefore, it's statistically likely that person will be on duty. And therefore, it's statistically likely that they would have been fingered as a suspect. Question 15. The statistician, Professor John O'Quigley, has declared the shift chart to be a scientific fake that could not have been produced by the method claimed by the prosecution. Would you like to comment on this? So here is the study that Professor O'Quigley has produced, Suspected Serial Killers and Unsuspected Statistical Blunders. I'll just read the start of the abstract briefly. A whole branch of theoretical statistics devotes itself to the analysis of clusters, the aim being to distinguish an apparent cluster rising randomly from one that is more likely to have been produced as a result of some systematic influence. There are many examples in medicine, and some that involve both medicine and the legal field, criminal law in particular. Observed clusters or a series of cases in a given setting can set off alarm bells, the recent conviction of Lucy Letby in England being an example. And then it goes on to explain the problems with the work that has been done in this court case. Of course, Dr. Evans wants to claim credit for the statistics. He wants to claim credit for finding the insulin cases when the police have told The Guardian and Vanity Fair that Stephen Breary found the insulin cases. He wants to claim credit for everything. It's possible, and I would say even quite likely, that this conversation that he's claiming here with the Daily Mail never even took place. Or it could be his memory failing him. But it seems to me that this is just a case of the man's conceit. So he has to claim credit for everything. So he has to say, oh, look, I told the police, right, you should do this. Now, it's perfectly possible that he did tell the police that they should do that. But as he claims credit for everything in this case, even stuff that elsewhere has been completely contradicted by people involved with the prosecution, this may never have happened. But I'm just assuming, seeing as he stated that it happened, that it actually did happen. Question number 16. Philip J. Brown, Emeritus Professor of Statistics, University of Kent. A. Philip David, FRS Emeritus Professor of Statistics, University of Cambridge. Richard Gill, Emeritus Professor of Statistics, Leiden University. Peter Green, FRS Emeritus Professor of Statistics, University of Bristol. Julia Mortera, Honorary Professor, University of Bristol. Stephen Sen, Independent Consultant Statistician. Jim Q. Smith, Professor of Statistics, University of Warwick. Simon Wood, Professor of Statistical Computing, University of Edinburgh, have also recently criticised statistical claims made by the prosecution via Dr. Philip Hammond's Private Eye column. There have been at least a dozen statisticians that have spoken out on this subject, criticising the shift chart and the conclusions drawn from it, which, according to your account, were made by you. The shift chart is the entire basis of the prosecution case, and once rendered worthless, as we now know that it is, the prosecution case is without foundation. Would you like to comment on this? So I can't show the whole comment from Private Eye, but it's well worth reading the 20th iteration of Dr. Philip Hammond's column, in which he goes over why the statistical case is so completely defunct for this court case. As noted here, the 8 people I mentioned all agreed on the wording for the analyses below of 3 key statistical claims made by the prosecution. And there's more than 8 now, because I know of at least 12 statisticians that have come forward to make these statements, and there've been none, and there never will be. There will never be a statistician that will ever come forward to defend what went in the court case. I can promise you. Question 17. One statistician suggested to me that showing this chart to the jury should be considered as illegal as planting a gun or forging test data. Would you like to comment on this? Question 18. When you recommended the approach cited to police, did you intellectually understand that your methodology would inevitably identify a suspect? Do you indeed understand that now? Question 19. You have previously asserted that statistics had nothing to do with this case. Would you like to retract this statement now? So I think these series of questions are quite clear. Dr. Evans has made various comments about statistics. Those comments are looking more and more ridiculous, as indeed is the statistical case that was advanced by the prosecution in court. Indeed, it's fundamentally flawed to the extent that I can't even see how there could be a retrial, because it would just be a monumental embarrassment for the Crown Prosecution Service, the police, and everyone involved with the prosecution. Question 20. When interviewed by Sky News, to cite one example, you praised the standards at the Council of Chester and the quality of the neonatal unit, despite not speaking to anyone at the hospital by your own admission. Considering what we now know about the hospital and its neonatal unit, would you like to retract this statement? So firstly, we know there's been lethal outbreaks of bacteria on this unit that was knowingly infected with sewage, and sepsis was endemic. And then the panel of international experts has also been highly critical of both the standard of medical practice on the unit and various other aspects of neonatology that were central to the processes. So I will read this list out. Inadequate numbers of appropriately trained personnel, lack of training for assigned nursing roles, inadequate staffing, work overload, poor plumbing and drainage resulting in need for intensive cleaning. This was a potential factor in Stenotrophomonas multifilia colonisation and infection. Poor environmental temperature controlling facility, difficulty in finding a doctor when need arose, congestion at medication cabinet and preparation trolley, lack of appropriate facilities for sterile preparation, for example, IV drugs prepared in corridor. One of the babies was born in a toilet, I should mention with regard to this. Some high-risk infants who should have been born and cared for at high-level institutions were born and cared for in Cancer Chester Hospital because of a shortage of beds at higher-level facilities where they should have been admitted. There were delays in transfer of sick infants to high-level facilities when the need arose. And bear in mind, this is just scratching the surface. This is not anywhere near the totality of problems on this unit. This is just a very small, short summary that doesn't even touch upon many other problems. Question 21. When speaking with BBC journalists Judith Morris and Jonathan Coffey, you claim that neonatology is merely a label and that there is no significant difference between neonatology and paediatrics. In fact, those qualifying for neonatology must undergo 3 years of specialist study. According to the British Medical Journal, the GRID programme which neonatologists must undertake in order to qualify attracts very high competition. All trainees are required to complete the RCPCH START exam for neonatology, a clinical examination encompassing 12 stations. Those qualifying for neonatology then work in that specialism exclusively for the rest of their careers. Would you therefore like to retract the claim that neonatology is a label? So I've backed up this question by demonstrating this here. The British Medical Journal article highlights that applying to the National GRID programme for neonatal medicine training is highly competitive. Trainees must complete the RCPCH START exam for neonatology, a clinical exam with 12 stations, as part of their qualification, and the rest of this document just goes on to confirm what I've previously mentioned there in the question. In order to demonstrate the high degree of specialism involved in neonatology, I've asked this question of ChatGPT: roughly how many practicing neonatologists are there in the UK? Now, it's very difficult to get a completely accurate figure, as is stated here, but after some estimation, it's stated here, looking at figures that are available, that given that neonatology is one of 17 paediatric subspecialties, and considering the competitive nature of its training positions, it's reasonable to estimate that neonatologists comprise a modest proportion of the total paediatric consultant workforce. Based on these figures, it's plausible to estimate that there are approximately 300 to 500 practicing neonatologists in the UK. In order to further illustrate this, I've asked another question here to ChatGPT. Now, I could have done the estimation for this very accurately myself, but I thought it'd be more illustrative just to show the question. How many players play in the Premier League each season? The number of players who participate in the English Premier League each season can vary, but here's a breakdown to give a clear picture. There are 20 clubs in the Premier League each season. Each club can register a maximum of 25 senior players, plus unlimited under 21 players. Including senior and under 21 players who make at least one appearance, the total number of individual players who play in the Premier League in a given season typically ranges between 500 and 600. For example, in 2022-23, around 560 players made at least one appearance, and in the 2021-22 season, it was approximately 540 players. So essentially, neonatologists are rarer than Premier League footballers. Obviously, Premier League footballers probably the most privileged waged profession in the country. Neonatologists don't get the same money, but they are actually rarer than Premier League footballers. So for Dr. Evans to dismiss the very intensive, very challenging training programme that's involved in qualifying for neonatology as just a label being attached to a doctor is utterly ridiculous, and again, it's just indicative of his vanity and arrogance. Question 22. You previously stated that those questioning this conviction are the least qualified, and later doubled down on this by claiming that I have not heard any criticism from any individual whose view I respect, and I have not heard any criticism from any organisation whose view I respect. Considering that everyone who's criticised your work is more qualified than you, and that they are strongly affiliated with the most credentialed and respected neonatology and paediatrics bodies in the world, would you like to retract these remarks? A frankly staggering remark these made to the British Medical Journal just months ago, completely embarrassing for him. So you can see this statement here, and I've just highlighted something else that I will also go into But if you just look over the statement, you can see Dr. Evans making his usual specious remarks about neonatology and what the panel have actually said. He's so far out of his depth at this point. I mean, it's embarrassing, but yet he thinks he can stand up to them. I mean, what a joke. He's just got absolutely no chance. However, the reason I've highlighted this blue statement is just the kind of crap that he comes out with. So he claims, oh, the reports, I've not seen any reports that would stand up to scientific scrutiny. Okay, so you haven't seen anything that would stand up to scientific scrutiny. How do you define scientific scrutiny? Which would stand up in court, in other words. So your definition of scientific scrutiny is a forum in which there is literally no one there that's scientifically qualified other than the person that's giving the theory. So, I mean, it's literally not scientific at all. If the major criticism of court and court cases and the judicial system and the court criminal justice system is that it can't deal with science because the judges don't understand science, the lawyers don't understand science, the Crown Prosecution Service doesn't understand science, and the jury doesn't understand science. So this is a forum in which there is almost no scientific scrutiny. But this is just a kind of nonsense argument that you try and sneak past people and hope that they don't notice. Well, I do notice. Question 23. How did you eliminate doctors from having caused either accidental or malicious harm? So this is a particularly important question because this report from the panel regarding Baby O contests the prosecution evidence against Lucy, alleging that a doctor caused the baby to die by apparently mistakenly pressing a needle into the liver while trying to relieve swelling in the abdomen. Question 24. How was Dr. Bohin selected to be involved in the case? Considering that you are both affiliated with the National Crime Agency and she apparently knows you well enough to refer to you by your first name when interviewed, do you think she was really an appropriate selection? And were you involved in this in any way? Now, I'm sure that he would deny this. He's always denied it so far, and it's possible that he wasn't involved in the selection of Dr. Bohin, but it seems to me that they have a rather cosy relationship and that it was a very poor selection. Although, given that they previously selected Martin Ward-Platt, who'd previously been involved in 2 other miscarriages of justice involving murder, the cases of Donna Anthony and Angela Cannings. I think I've got that the right way around. I think they've got the Christian names. Yeah, it's Donna Anthony and Angela Cannings. I was hoping it's not Donna Cannings and Angela Anthony, but it's not. Yeah, so Ward-Platt was involved with the exonerated Donna Anthony, who was convicted of murder, and the exonerated Angela Cannings, who's convicted of murder. And yet he's still in this case, and Dr. Evans described him as a great guy. So his relationship with these fellow experts from the National Crime Agency is pretty inappropriate in my opinion, but I'm sure that Donna Anthony and Angela Cannings would not share his opinion that Martin Ward-Platt is a great guy. Question 25. The Court of Appeal describes, in paragraph 23, the process involved with peer reviewing these cases. I assume that you accept this, considering that you have praised the Court of Appeal several times. In this summary, the Court of Appeal makes it clear that this peer review was not blind and that your conclusions were passed to Dr. Bohin. Numerous medics and scientists have criticised this, and indeed all available evidence indicates that it was deeply inappropriate. Would you like to comment on this? So this is the statement that I've mentioned previously regarding the peer review. So the conclusions and reports of Dr. Evans were simply passed to Dr. Bohin, who then looked at, it says here, provide a robust clinical review of Dr. Evans' opinions. Well, that's a contradiction in terms. Everyone that I've spoken to has said, look, there's just no way that this is a peer review. It can't possibly be considered a peer review. And I think you don't really need to know anything about science or medical matters in order to understand that. So it would have been interesting to see what Dr. Evans had to say about that, considering that this is another thing that has been universally criticised. So that's all the 25 questions that I want to address in this video. When I wrote to Dr. Evans, and you can see this message on the screen, I must say it was rather courteous considering my opinion of Dr. Evans. He was, perhaps unsurprisingly, not forthcoming, because at this point in time he cannot answer questions. The knots he would have tied himself in if he'd actually attempted to answer even these 25 questions would have been quite surreal. There's just no way he can answer questions at this point of view, considering the public statements that he's already put out there. And even just these 2 paragraphs I've already addressed previously in this video here. Lucy Letby, Dr. Evans still can't keep quiet. He simply couldn't just say, I don't have any comment to make, or this is a legal matter at this point in time. he had to make a comment to The Guardian because his ego and his arrogance is such that he just cannot stand any form of criticism. So obviously The Guardian have put a load of questions to him. He can't answer those questions at this point because he would just make himself look utterly ridiculous. So the best he can do is put out this meaningless statement that I have then decimated in this video. So that's the end of this video on Dr. Evans. But that is only the first of several videos in this series because I have many questions for him that go way beyond these 25. I've created a playlist for Dr. Evans that contains this video and the previous video that's on the screen, and I will be including all of these videos that will, from the next time I make one of these videos, we'll start from question 26, and we'll just keep going until I don't have any more questions for him. I don't know how many that will be, but I expect it will go well over 100. It could go to 200. Who knows, it could go beyond 200, but there will be many more questions in this series. So all I would say is if you have any comments, queries, questions, corrections, please do let me know. I'm very appreciative again of the support, and I hope you enjoy watching this video, and I look forward to reading your comments.